Hey everybody, welcome back to my channel. It is the morning of Sunday, January 9th, and it is 28 degrees outside. Normally in my channel, I'm going to take you from seed to harvest and beyond, but during these cold winter months, we're stuck inside, we can still do projects. So for today's project, we're going to be focusing on the Amaryllis bulb. It is a beautiful flowering bulb that can bring beauty to your home even when it's freezing outside. And then you get to treat it as a houseplant. It's very versatile, very gorgeous, very easy to take care of, and today I'm going to take you through planting and care guide. So let's get started. Let's first start by talking about what materials we'll need for this project. The most important thing is an Amaryllis bulb itself. You can order these online. I got mine from colorblends.com. You can also buy them at your garden center or just even the grocery store floral department typically has these. Normally they're displayed in bloom like this one, but if you're wanting a fresh bulb, I suggest ordering from a garden center or online. So real quick, a little bit about Amaryllis bulb anatomy. Luckily with this type of bulb, it's really easy to tell what's the top and what's the bottom. That's not always the case with bulbs, like some of the daffodils and tulips and bluebells I put in my property. It was a little bit more difficult to tell which way was up and which way was down. Amaryllis bulb, it is clearly obvious. This is the top, this is where it's going to send out its stem and eventual flowers. And then these, of course, are the roots. So this is how we want to orient the bulb once we plant it in our container. You'll also need some soil. So this is just regular potting mix that you can pick up from the store. And I've pre-moistened it. So that just means that I took it out of the bag, placed it in my bowl, and then added a significant amount of water. You know that you have the perfect amount of water in your soil if you grab a handful of it, squeeze it, no water drips out, but when I release my hand, the soil keeps its shape. So that looks perfect. You also need some kind of container to put your bulb in. For this container, it's perfect because it does have a drainage hole on the bottom and a built-in saucer. This is perfect. You definitely want to find a container with drainage holes in them. One thing that I would say about finding the perfect container for your Amaryllis bulb is the smaller the circumference of the container, the better. Believe it or not, Amaryllis bulbs do like to be hugged a bit by their container, and that helps later on when they shoot up these big tall stems and get a little top heavy with their blooms. Having a tight fitting container prevents them from falling over. And there's other things that we can do to prevent that as well. We'll talk about that later. And then finally, this last part is optional, but I have some top dressing that I can put on top or around my bulb in the container. Two options that I have for today include dried sheet moss and just some garden stones, so like this variety of pebbles, just for decorative purposes in case you want to look at something pretty or interesting versus exposed soil around the bulb. All right, I think it's time to get to planting. All right, so I have a little bit of potting soil in here already. I'm just gonna take my extra potting soil and fill this up mostly to the top. I would say about 80% of the way. Lightly tamp it down, make sure there's no air pockets, and pre-moistening your soil does help prevent air pockets as well. All right. So before I place my bulb, I'm actually going to make a little indentation for where that bulb is going to sit. That way I'm helping out the roots come in contact with my potting soil because that's how the bulb is going to absorb the moisture and nutrients that it needs. So roots going in first, I'm just going to nestle them into the indentation, make sure all of them come into contact with the potting soil. I'm just going to nestle the bulb in here, make sure that it's center, and I like how it's positioned. Okay, that looks pretty good. I'm going to tamp down the soil around the bulb now. All right, so I'm just going to add a little bit more potting soil around the edges of this bulb. Once you find the widest part of your bulb, you really don't want to plant it any deeper than that. A good majority of the bulb itself is going to be sticking up out of the soil. So now I'm going to press down a little bit more firmly just to make sure everything stays in place. Again, we want to create this solid foundation so that once it does send up its stems and then those stems bloom, it's going to get top heavy. So if we set a stable and solid foundation, we can prevent it from toppling over. That looks pretty good. So I have about 1 inch headspace on this container. And if you want to top dress it, now would be the time. So like I said, this part is totally optional. I'm just gonna do it because I think it looks pretty. So I have this sheet moss that I bought from the store that I'm just gonna tease apart a little bit. And just gently place it on the top of the exposed soil. Not only does sheet moss make your container look nice, but it also helps to retain moisture. And for a bulb like the Amaryllis bulb, it does like a pretty moist environment. So this top dressing of sheet moss helps keep the soil moist and helps keep the bulb happy. All right, this next step is also optional, but I'm going to be using a second top dress just for interest's sake. I think it's really pretty looking to just kind of scatter some stones on top of the dried moss. I'm pretty happy with how that looks. Now that I have my Amaryllis bulb planted, I'm just going to add a little bit of water just to really make sure that soil is moist, which is how the bulb likes it. And then I probably won't water again until it sends up its first stem. You can see it's kind of peeking through here, but I'm going to wait until it's at least 1 inch or 2 tall before I add more moisture back into this container. And then you should have blooms in 4 to 8 weeks. All right, so we just planted this Amaryllis bulb, and if I were to fast forward 4 to 8 weeks, this is where we would be. So I planted this in probably late October, early November, I would have to say. And if you time it right, you actually might get these big, beautiful blooms on Christmas time. You typically think of a Christmas flower as a poinsettia, but I think Amaryllis is a good candidate as well. So you can have a variety of different flower colors. It just depends on the type of bulb you buy. This one happens to be a beautiful rich pink, but Amaryllis flowers also come in white and red, and then any combination of those colors, pink, red, and white. Right now, one of my stems is in bloom with 4 flowers. 1, 2, 3, 4, and then I have a second stem growing in the back here that will also bloom an additional 4 flowers. I just have these flexible tomato ties, so actually they're for staking tomatoes and other plants in the garden. You might think that it disrupts its beauty, but it's actually quite necessary. Without these stakes, and this has actually happened with my Amaryllis bulb while it's been in bloom, they've just completely flopped over because they've been too top heavy. So at least the stakes are green and not a color that sticks out too much. Once the blooms of the Amaryllis have kind of died off and wilted, you get to cut back the stems, leaving about 6 inches above the bulb. So make sure you use a sharp tool so you get a nice clean cut, leave about 6 inches of stem. At that point, you might actually have some leaves coming out of the bulb. So I have one little baby leaf coming out of the back here, but I imagine when it's time to cut back the Amaryllis stems and flowers, I'll have several more leaves. You're going to want to leave those intact because once we move the Amaryllis bulb out into the yard where it's sunny and warm after the danger of frost, those leaves are going to be key to gaining nutrients for the growth and the health of the bulb. So we leave the leaves intact. So like I said, we do get to transfer the bulb outdoors after danger of frost. It can live there in a full sun spot, nice and warm, until about September. That's when you're going to want to bring your bulb inside, and this next part is going to seem kind of cruel, but it's necessary if you want to get beautiful bulbs from year to year. So you actually bring it inside around September because you have to trick it into thinking it's going into dormancy. So I'm going to take my bulb with its leaves, and I'm going to make sure it doesn't receive any additional moisture or sunlight from September September when I bring it inside till about 4 to 8 weeks before I want my blooms to be in full show. So maybe like mid-November. It's just gonna live in my basement. It's a cool area, but not cold area. So that's key, because you don't wanna harm the bulb during its dormancy period by placing it in an area that is too cold. And then 4 to 8 weeks before you want your full show of blooms, you'll bring it back up from wherever you were storing it, and you can give it a little bit of water. You'll place it in a sunny area, and then shortly after that, it should send up some fresh stems. It should put on a show for you after several weeks of growth. And then you'll just repeat that cycle every year to get this beautiful display of flowers. If you time it right, you can usually have a display of flowers for a holiday. Maybe Christmas or New Year's, maybe Valentine's Day, like this one that I just planted today. Maybe I'll get some Valentine's Day blooms. And then the cycle repeats. Once the danger of frost has passed, I'm going to bring the bulb outside. The leaves are going to make sure it gets enough nutrients to replenish the bulb. Around September, bring it back inside for the dormancy period, and then I'll get my blooms again. I think that's it. All right, everybody, that's it for today's video. I hope you enjoyed seeing how to plant an Amaryllis bulb and then how to take care of an Amaryllis bulb. These are truly beautiful flowering bulbs, and I think everybody should have at least one in their household. Thanks so much for watching. If you'd like to support my work, please do consider subscribing, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.